Okay. My name is Mayek Dalila, and I'm a co-founder of Black Star Line, African Centered Family Educational Collective. I'm also a daughter and an auntie, and a mom of a 17-year-old Black male that's getting ready to be 18 and go into and emerging into adulthood. And so I'm really glad to be here.
Hello, my name's Kellen Higgins. I am a sophomore at the University of Puget Sound. I'm also the Black Student Union president at the University of Puget Sound. Uh, I'm a double major in environmental policy and African American studies with a minor in politics and government. I also work over here in the Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity, and it's great to be here to talk with you. Um, so we're going to go ahead and go into our first question. Which two community identified approaches, like in our section, which is education, excites us the most and why? So I'm going to talk about redefining academic standards to cultivate Black brilliance. One thing about being here at like working with Black students at the collegiate level, we really see the ways in which education systems aren't made for Black people and how we feel ostracized in educational systems. And I think that when we're redefining terms of like academics, it really means moving away from like uh, academics being white. So looking at the ways in which we are unlearning and creating new things with education systems that aren't really meant for us. And I think one thing that's really exciting about that is innovation. When we're seeing Black innovation and the ways in which uh, Black students, like Black students, I just feel like are always redefining academics by taking it to above standards that have already been set for us, but it's something that we are able to. I feel like we're just constantly rising above it all. And then another community identified approach that really stuck out to me was accountability and transparency. Uh, Again, in the collegiate setting, it's like I feel like I see a lot of Black students who have a hard time navigating the institution uh, because they aren't as, or historically, I feel like we have been taught not to be ingrained in institutions in a certain way. So when uh, talking and working with like administration, um, there's definitely a barrier there because of a lack of transparency. So when we increase transparency and when Black students are really able to understand how institutions work, that gives us a greater ability to be working in the institutions. And when we are doing that, I feel like that's when we make really big change.
So, Kaylin, you brought up a good issue, an important issue, especially with your first point around the fact that many times in these institutions, we feel like we have to be twice as good,
Mm,
right? We have to work twice as hard. And you also bring up just and remind me around how much work has been put into the current education system since day one. We had to fight to get in there.
hmm
And as I said before, Black Star Line has a lot of respect and honors, those ancestors that did that work, that definitely paved the way so that you could matriculate where you're going to school, where made it so I could go to school and get an education, and it not be illegal. So we have lots of respect for all that work and effort that was put in. And definitely folks that, the struggle still continues. People are still fighting. You're talking about it going on at your campus. And so um, that's a constant. We believe that these approaches were interesting to read, but they really do focus on systemic change, looking at what's been given us and how can we reform it, how can we make it more better. And we at Black Star Line really believe in Black brilliance, as I'm sure that you do as well. And that there's been, as I've said before, lots of time, effort, and energy put into trying to fix what we believe is a broken system. And we really believe that we have the brilliance and the expertise and the knowledge to create schools and educational projects and products that then are geared toward our children, our students, our families. And so the approach is, again, we know that it's important to do what we need to do with what we've been given, but there is, we can be creative. We are creative, and that there are other ways in which our children and students can be educated. The approach that really looked at integrating mastery and competency towards self actualization, I believe can't happen in the current system. But it can happen with an African centered approach that then we in the community and in the families and homes within the Black community, we definitely can make happen. So, what it looks like to create your own, right? We have so many examples of it. Black Star Line started off as a homeschool collective, but we've really been renamed by Dr. Maxine Mims in our approach that really it's village schooling. And in the report, it talks about the fact that that's how many of us have been raised as well, getting lots of information and cultivating brilliance from people in our community. So definitely homeschooling and village schooling is an option. There's also independent Black schools that are happening not just in King County and in our area, so that's happening as we speak. But we have historic models. We don't have to make this up. Definitely, Black Star Line stands on the shoulders of so many folks. There was in our area there was the Delaney School that was brought to us by Mother Zakia Stewart, who's with the ancestors, but also Mother Sadi Kifu and Mother Jermaine Covington. um, they then brought a Saturday Black school in order to augment and offset what was happening to their children in dominant culture school system. And then, bringing honor to the Garvey School that was in our area, ran by Mother and Father Farr, who are with the ancestors. Again, they educated not only their children, but other children in the community. And so there's just a plethora of, ways in which we can educate our children. We do know that it's easier, said than done, but there's definitely ways in which we can make that happen, and that we are making it happen.
When looking at like what it means, like when we are seen and when we are being educated, like one thing that has been like on my mind a lot is like the concept of like legibility and the way that we as Black people are put into a lot of like boxes, especially like educationally, and the things in which we can and can't do. And I think that being able to be seen from an educational standpoint like helps me, I know, feel like I can do anything, which is something that we're not allowed to think, especially from the perspective of the president of a BSU. I'm seeing so many different students in collegiate systems from completely different walks of life, completely different interests. But even though everybody's doing something different, and these are a lot of people that I probably wouldn't meet in my educational like systems, when we're able to be together and kind of celebrate like what we're doing, I'm seeing a lot of community and a lot of things going out of that.
I think the conversation around education and what does that mean can take a couple of different paths, right? There's definitely a conversation to be had about the distinction between being educated and schooling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are different kinds of phenomenon. We believe and know that, lifelong learning is important, and that, we kind of get stuck in this credentialed piece, but then we are matriculating in the dominant culture, which honors that and believes in that, right? And it's said that, the more letters you have behind your name, the more opportunities that are open for you. But that, there's definitely a conversation around the distinction. I think there's also a misnomer in a lot of ways that Black folks don't, honor education. And what's been, and we know that that's not true. We are the founders, and the folks that have developed a whole, historically Black college system, made a way out of no way. And From the very beginning, of our children coming into, this society, into the world, we begin to, educate them, in ways that we think and know are important, not just for them academically, but socially, emotionally, culturally, spiritually, all of that, right? And so I think, part of the conversation to be had is that, going back to that, the educational system that many of us, start with in kindergarten, is that, it only is designed to develop, one kind of way, one kind of person. And
Mm-hmm.
there is more development that needs to happen. We do this exercise at Black Star Line, and it came to us, from early childhood education. I believe, my friend, Sharon Cronin brought it to us, and we asked Black parents to envision their children. When they're 18. What is that person going to look like? How's that person going? What are they going to be doing in that kind of stuff? And people, are able to see that, and you can see, the light in their eyes. But no one ever says, that they, understand, algebra and chemistry, and can recite, the chart. Nobody says, people aren't, really leaning in and valuing, to that point, that their children are, at this academic level, before, they know who they are as, human beings, as folks that know who they are and appreciate where they came from. So yeah, that's it. Oh, you're gonna cut that out?
What do I dream about around education? Wow, there's a lot of things I dream around about education. I'm going to start not within education itself, but looking at like accessibility, I guess. And I kind of want to speak to what Mariette was saying about like the way that we like our values around education. I don't think my thoughts on this aren't 100% like thought out, but I think that we value education so much as as kind of like I would say kind of like I can't think of the word, but like a starting point almost, is kind of I felt like what Maya was saying when we're talking about opportunities, but I feel like when we're talking about education, we don't understand that like we're always learning, that we're always like learning and unlearning. So we have this really academic approach to education, but education is also like so much more than that, especially when talking about like Blackness, and looking at things from the Black perspective. We're seeing how like I feel like sorry, my thoughts on this aren't fully fleshed out, but seeing how like education isn't just from that academic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then something else that I dream about education. Accessibility was something else that I talked about, especially with like working when we're working at the collegiate level and we're talking about education. It's like I wouldn't be here without scholarship. Like I just wouldn't be able to. And even though I am here and we're talking about race, we're looking at like which sectors of campus or which departments or which studies that I feel like I'm allowed to study or that I feel comfortable being in. So I think we really need to understand within education how much like our academic paths are controlled, I think, by like our identity, and we we really need to be like we need to, or at least I know that I dream, and I'm trying to actively work against that, and place ourselves into places where we are not seen as like not where we're not quote unquote supposed to be, or it's something where we're not seen as like being present in.
I am, really excited about a couple of the approaches that were identified. I definitely would say the first one is the integrated mastery or competency-based learning towards self-actualization. And that's simply because I know the conversations that are happening across our state, including in our state legislature, the types of education policy that is coming down the pipeline. So making sure that as these conversations about mastery and competency-based learning, as these conversations are happening, it's critically important that the Black community and Black education organizations are at the table and also in agreement with the direction of the mastery and competency-based learning and practices and standards that are being created, so that we can make sure it is heading towards self-actualization and that it is absolutely going to support and benefit Black students in their academic and social experiences. And I mean, there's so many good approaches, but I also was in a meeting where we were talking about, all data is good data. There is something to learn from any data that you have. And so I think the re-examining what data we want to collect and assess growth and accountability is critically important. There's lots of really good information out there, but I think it is important to be intentional, to figure out like what is it that we want to look for, what is most impactful and beneficial, and what's most informative as it relates to data, and what will really help us to determine growth and accountability as it relates to education here in our state. So those are two that absolutely get me excited, and I like to see where those approaches lead us in the future. And I think one dream that I have and that I hope can manifest into reality is that we can figure out, as it relates to public education and our community members who even are advocates and champions for different school options. I believe in school options as well. I love that right here in Tacoma, there's Sammy and Soda and Idea and a number of schools that are allowing families to give students a more specific and relatable academic experience. But what I dream about is that community can continue to work together to do what's best for students. And I think there are lots of silos doing really great work, and it would be my dream that we can bring folks together collectively for the benefit of Black students here across our state, just more and more. A lot of us are kind of cross-sector and cross-group and very collaborative, but my dream that I hope can manifest into reality is that we continue to bring those conversations together and collaborate and figure out what we want for Black students across the state.
Appreciate hearing folks' dreams. That's a fun one. The whole idea of dreaming and thinking about what's possible is something that I think is really important when it comes to education. Oftentimes, folks are convene tables, and the Black community is invited to come. A dream I have is that in our communities, we convene the tables
Mm,
and we control the resources that are designated and are supposed to be allocated to educate our children. And that a dream I have is one that honors the brilliance and the capacity and the ability of Black folks um, to um, to develop systems and ways in which to um, righteously educate our children. The data itself says that the current public school system isn't good for our kids. What we have learned over the last, if we didn't know it before, what we've learned over the last, 5 to 7 years is that the school to prison pipeline is real, that institutionalized racism is real. It is the water in which our children swim in. And when Black parents go to advocate, go to have the backs of their children in those systems, they too are re traumatized because they were once the students in those systems. And so I think that one of the things that I dream about is that we radically, very change the way and our approach to bringing education to the Black community, and I think we're close to that. I think that there's great examples of that going on in various parts of our state, and so I look forward to seeing more of that.
this might be my perspective might be a little bit on the smaller scale, just because I think education for me feels very personal right now because I'm in schooling, but man, I just want to be able to study whatever I want. Uh, like I see, like, I have friends, and like myself included, have changed what we're studying, not entirely based on interest, but just based on um, like the the not, I guess, not our own capacity, but the capacity like we're given to show up in certain spaces, or the way in which certain departments, certain like professors or our educators are seen to be against us, uh, the ways that we are not able to thrive in certain areas. I really think like areas that are out of our control should not be shaping the ways in which we decide that we want to get educated.
Mhm.
Essentially, in systems like collegiate systems, which are supposed to be geared towards you being able to choose what you want to educate.
Right.
I mean, what you want to get educated in. I just want to be able to choose what I want to get educated in.
Well, I think, and that's really, I think you're really speaking to the fact. I know we're talking about the education system as it pertains to Black folks. But I think that what we're going to see, I'm not, have a crystal ball or whatever, but I think one of the things that we know is that the current education system, how it is structured in this country, is antiquated, right? Like
Mm,
it's nobody is doing all that well in it. And one of the things that we then experience is that if no one's doing well, the folks that are not doing the worst in some ways, or is folks of color and Black folks is who we're talking about today. And so I think you're speaking to the fact that it could use an overhaul, and how that happens, not quite sure, but I really trust that there are people in the nooks and crannies of the educational system that, if given the opportunity to envision another reality, can do that, right? And
mm.
I'd be very, very supportive of that.
The other thing about education is the conversation is happening across the state in many different areas. So many of us are having them at our nonprofit organizations like the Tacoma Urban League. We get to have the conversation as a part of this report in partnership with Bird Bar Place and Black Future Co-op Fund. There are also organizations like the Black Education Strategies Roundtables and other nonprofits and BSUs across the county and the state. And also these conversations about what's best for students, and in particular, what's best for Black students, and connecting those outcomes to data. Those conversations are happening also in many boardrooms. And as I mentioned before, they're also happening in our state legislature. And so I encourage folks to, definitely, if you are already involved with these groups, try to encourage that cross communication and partnership. So we are collaborating and trying to, get behind a collective agenda. I think an organization like in Pierce County, Graduate Tacoma, or Foundation for Tacoma Students, is doing a really good job of bringing so many sectors together: business, education, government, but just so many folks who care about the future of our county, which means we need quality, relevant education for our students. Those folks are at the table having those conversations. And I encourage folks to also, in addition to trying to bring those groups together, I encourage folks to, if you're not involved, to get involved and to do things like maybe listen in now that so many of these meetings and educational groups are including a remote or virtual component, to maybe listen in to some of these meetings, listen into school board meetings at what decisions are being made, because we on school boards, we talk about students and subgroups. So we're looking at students who are multiracial, students who are Black students, white students, students who are Native American, different groups of Asian and Pacific Islander students, and students who identify as Latinx or Spanish and some other way. But we're looking at the data of all these subgroups and how they're performing and how they're impacted by discipline and how they're impacted by supports in schools, and then also deciding what types of support or conversations or pivots need to happen in our local districts. And so I definitely think that as we are having these conversations and trying to figure out where do we need to add voice, where do we need to just show up and listen, where do we need to pay attention, to also think about those boardrooms or even PTA groups that are having these conversations, nonprofit organizations of businesses who care about our economy, care about the future of our counties. We want to make sure that we're also, trying to have those conversations with businesses and corporations. And the same on a state level. I think even knowing that the state has a virtual component to remote testimony or just access to what's happening on committees during session, listening into what's happening in those conversations that our state level leaders are having. What decisions are they making? How is education on the state level going to change? And so I know lots of folks who are listening are already engaged, but there is someone listening who wants to be more involved, who doesn't know where to start, who has dreams of what they see for our students, from birth to college and career. And there are lots of ways to get that information, lots of ways to get involved, to add voice, or just to show up and learn, and not show up as in folks are not already working really hard and engaging in other places. But if you're looking to learn more about education and you have great ideas, you have hopes and dreams for our future generations, there are plenty of places that will welcome you, or plenty of places where you should just be, where your voice is absolutely needed and valued, in spaces where it's really important that we show up and talk about these, the findings of the report, to talk about these approaches, to talk about what we know from our lived experience, what we know our own students need, or what we needed as a student, or even from our professional experience. And so I hope that we continue to, have those conversations in those places and spaces, but invite and encourage new voices to also participate.
That's, I'm loving that. And Stefan, as you were talking about folks that are having those conversations, I just want to, also say I've been in an amazing kinds of spaces at Africa Town that has been doing amazing things and is focusing in on education. I've had the opportunity to visit Monroe and witness the TEACH program that's coming out of the Black Prisoners Caucus. We at Black Star Line are pulling together Black parents and caregivers to have some of these conversations as well. I think that what you bring up is the fact that these conversations are having that, happening at many levels of our community, and that folks will be able to tap in where it makes sense for them to tap in, and where they feel comfortable, and where they feel like their voices can be heard and change can happen. And so that's really exciting. I think that there's cool things that are happening, and that we are trying to make dreams come true at many different levels of our community.
And we're talking about like different perspectives and bringing different groups to the table. I don't speak for all young people, but I know that like from my experiences and just like the people that are around me, students are liking, uh, you know, having say over what they learn. I think that goes back to what I was talking about, and that goes back to uh, I think then also, looking at the collegiate setting, that goes back to kind of the way when we're talking about like K through 12, how it's so, what is the word, standardized, everything that we do. Students are wanting to take hold and take control of their own education and what they're learning. I also have seen a bunch of students are wanting to look at things from multiple perspectives when we're talking about uh, like not just one thing, but something else combined. I know that like coming from the liberal arts perspective, that's kind of like how our degrees work, is looking at a bunch of different things and how they intersect and work with each other. I think that's so important, especially in like the real world, being able to see the different nuances of things. Yeah. uh, I think that's really integral when wanting to apply things that you're learning that's not even like academics, when you're wanting to really take and learn what you're applying to different aspects of your life.
Thank you. And what you shared made me reflect on some of the things that I've realized and learned over the, past several years. One of them is absolutely, many of us in our community have very, very similar goals. We also know what's best for us. We know what we want. We know what we need. We're talking about education, but we are very articulate about the type of academic and educational needs that we have and how that should be designed to best suit us. I think sometimes the gap is being heard and being listened to, and not just being pulled in for commentary and comments, but for opinions and commentary and comments to be also transformed into action. We want to see what we just told you is best for us, and what we want to see turned into action, right? Turned into absolute design. So I've realized that, that's what most people want. They want to see what they know is best for them turned into a reality, right? We have a lot of conversations. We talk about a lot of components of education. We look at the data. I mean, we've been doing a lot of these things for the years. I mean, I became a champion for my own kids' education by reading a lot of research and data around achievement gap. Before, we were calling it the opportunity gap, but we can also call it the opportunity gap. And I remember looking at lists of what it would take for my Black students to be successful, and I wanted to show up and do all those things. That's that's what other families want for their own child, right? And it's well researched and well documented. We care, we want to be involved, we want to make sure that our students are loved and respected in schools. And if so many families and community members want this for their students, I think it's the question is, why are we still asking and demanding these things? But I just have realized so many of us just have the same goals, the same desires for our educational experiences. We have the same type of educational needs. And why is it that year after year, students are showing up to the same college campus and making the same demands about, what we want to see and what we need? And so that's why I think the collaboration is even more important. And I think over the last several years, where I've seen the most growth, the most transformation, it has been a result of the power in numbers and the power of the collaboration and folks getting on the same page and leaving those silos to build that collective power together. And I think we need to continue to do that in education, to continue to say, this is what we want and this is what we need. And I mean this even for our college students. They should not have to champion those issues on their own. They should also be able to rely on, alumni, community organizations, but let's build that power. So it's not just a Black student union that's making these demands. It's a community of Black people who literally are asking for the same thing, birth through college and career. I mean, the demands and the agendas look relatively the same, the things that we're asking for as it relates to quality education, quality academic experiences. And I'm very optimistic. And again, my dream is that we continue to build that collective power. We continue to stand together until we see the change that we are demanding.
I guess I knew this before the past 5 to 7 years, but what has been very clear to me is that we have the ability to educate our own children, right? That's not elusive. We can do that. I've seen it done, and it's being done all over the state and all over the country. The other piece I think that I've come to really realize is the importance of highlighting and illuminating Black parental voices in the dialogue. Oftentimes, Black parental voices are muted and not respected, and that there needs to be a way in which it's understood that we are the leaders in our community and the leaders in our families. And so I think that that's something that's a realization. And then I think the other piece is that, the realization of how much time, effort, and energy we've put into creating an educational system that has or has not worked for us. And that it's important for us to use some time to heal, use some time to self-reflect, so that then we can create a better tomorrow for our children and for our families and for our community.
I mean, 7 years ago, I was 12. So the question really should be, what realizations haven't I had in the last 7 years? But I think for me, and I think I'm going to echo Senator Nobles here a little bit, has been my own individual power as a Black person, and even just as a person in general, how Candace, but how our education systems make us feel so powerless. Let me reiterate that. Our education systems make us feel powerless, and especially with the way that I think as Black students, a lot of times we feel isolated in education systems, especially when looking at the ways in which things don't ever seem like they're for us or they work for us. Growing up, and especially coming to college, and being able to find, I guess not find community, but uh, have a intentional time to have an intentional time to connect with each other and find community in the ways in which we do feel powerless, but really realizing that we do have power together, and being able to use that power to achieve the things that we want. And that goes back to like looking at what students want and also echoing what parents want. Yeah.
That's an interesting word, powerlessness. And again, there's something about the design of the current system that then puts that in our lap, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
goes unexamined when we continue to um, not look at other options other than trying to matriculate. I sound like a broken record. To try to matriculate in the current system, right? Because what we continuously try to do is scooch up to the table. What we continuously try to do is to prove ourselves. What we continuously try to do is make sure our children are equipped to navigate a system that, by its own, desire, really bursts a sense of powerlessness at the end of the day. And so I think that there's some other kinds of conversations that need to be had, other than what can we do to fix this? What can we do to plug up the holes? Because that's what we spend our time doing.
Mm.
And I think that what I would, again, I'm not the only one that's putting this on the table, but I think that one of the things that we believe is that we need to re-examine our approach, and we need to really take into consideration, our value system. And we need to come together and have those kinds of conversations. I think that I think it's sad to think about the fact that folks can come through a point of graduation at the end of 12th grade, or go on to college degrees and still feel a sense of powerlessness. And I think that's something for us to, I know that's something that we need to be looking at. And I think that some of the other data we need to be looking at, and we have been looking at, is how well our children are doing in the current system. By its own recognition and data, our children aren't doing well. And so if we're looking at, being customers of a particular place, maybe we need to think about, what else can be done? What other kinds of realities can we create? And I think there's also something to be said around us continue to do the same thing and getting and thinking that we're going to get different results. And I look forward to those kinds of conversations as well. We've been having these conversations a long time, and we do know what we want. We do have clarity around what's not working and what is, what can work better. And I think it's a conversation around who controls the resources and who makes decisions based on the control of those resources that we need to re-examine. So if we know that some stuff hasn't worked in the past and we continue to try to force that, what is that saying to the young people that are looking to us to provide another way? And so another way of thinking about what the possibilities for their lives can be. And I think that we owe it. It's irresponsible for us to continue to try to revamp and a current system that, again, is not working for our children, not working. And as I said before, all due respect to the folks that have and are currently working to do the meantime work needed But what can we do to start laying a path to a different reality so that the outcomes for our children are brighter um, in the future?
I think the community will benefit from just those common goals, that partnership. I mean, the Black Wellbeing Report is a wonderful starting place. It's critical information based on research, and as a community, it gives us a great framework to figure out where we can join together and really get some work done. It gives us really great information about where we have learned lessons, where we need to head. And I encourage all of our partners, business, nonprofit, government, professionals, retired folks, just people who care about the future of education here in Washington State and wanting to make sure that our Black students, which means, our Black students doing well means that the quality of education is then increased and improved for all students. So I think we need to work together. We need to be very strategic about what the future looks like in education and what steps we need to take. But we have the data, we have the information to help us to get there. We just need to all get on the same page and work as a team, and get behind those common goals for the sake of our students and their future, and making sure we're preparing them to take care of us, to lead us, to be many of our bosses, and folks who, they'll be the strategy leaders and the ones on the panel, and today and in the near future, and in many years to come. And so I think we have a very important job because it matters, but we absolutely cannot do this alone. It will take an entire team. But the reason is, the betterment of our future. So if we all care, then we all have to play a part and play a role.
Definitely, we can't do this alone. And Black Star Line believes in a community organizing approach. We do know that there's a lot of folks doing this kind of work. As I said before, they were doing it before us, and hopefully the next generation, as it's been said, will take it to its next level. It's been great being in coalition and in partnership with entities like the Village of Hope, like entities like Africa Town, like entities for Family Empowerment Institute. It's been really good, and want to continue to be in coalition and partnership with folks that understand the tenets of anti-racist organizing, because that is part of what needs to happen as we look at the educational system and all the systems in which Black folks are matriculating and existing in, and trying to thrive in, but many times are just surviving. And so I have a lot of hope. I know that we're doing great things locally, but I also know there are Black folks doing things nationally and internationally that we need to be tapping into, and that we can now tap into. We need to look back, utilize Sankofa in order to learn the lessons from history, and grab on to what folks taught us, and from lessons learned then, and apply it forward. And again, I'm glad to be here and having this conversation, and I look forward to many more like this.
I mean, the other two panelists have spoken to this amazingly. Is amazingly a word? It's fine, it doesn't matter. But I think additionally, like from the student perspective, when looking at education, looking at involving students in the work, I think a lot of times it's easy to be wanting to make change, or make change or I guess make change or working for like students and children specifically without actually involving children or students in that work. Their parents too. I think that we we spend too much time, I think, getting looked over to kind of
Hmm.
be letting all these decisions be made without us at the table, without us being here at the table to work with. And I think that a lot is lost perspective wise when we start leaving voices out of these issues.
I say.
I also think that, when we're looking at not making spaces or not dedicating enough time, enough funding to children and students, you'll see a lot of times that uh, children or students, we're having to come up with those resources or those fundings ourselves, and not. It's one thing to like to not have to not be given the available resources, but once again when we're seeing this extra workload being placed on to students in a way where now just being a Black student, you're no longer just a student, you're also doing all this other stuff. You have to take all these extra responsibilities. You can never just be a student. Um, you have to really take control of your own life because the resources aren't available for somebody else to help you out with it.
I mean, should I go? Oh, you go ahead.
I can go. And I will say, I mean, I'm in lots of different rooms, and while I understand collectively, and as a society and as a state, we need to do a better job of listening to student voices. I know um, on a state level, even when we have students testify, they are prioritized. If we have students who we know need to get back to class or took some time off of school to come and share with us, we prioritize listening to them. And part of why it's important to the legislature to maintain the remote option is for increased access, is because we saw more students than ever before participate in the legislative process. Whether they participated in a class with a teacher or on their own or with a family member, it provided increased access for students to be able to say to state government, here's what I need and what I want to see. And we were able to pass really amazing legislation like our um, um, mental health bill for students, where students get to have a mental health day in school. But what I have seen in the short time I've been a state senator is lots of student centered, student generated pieces of legislation, whether they pass or not. And the same thing with my school board experience. Lots of boards are advocating for a student rep, and not just a student rep in a performative way, but a student rep that has voting power. So we want to hear what they have to say, and we want them to be able to finalize those decisions with their vote. And I continue to hear other groups, other spaces. I think, especially in some of the nonprofit and board work that I do, there is a continued demand to hear from students and to create space. I attend a Black Collective on a weekend, and it's probably the same person, but every time we're talking about the way forward and how we can make improvements in the Tacoma Pierce County Black Collective. I think it's probably the same person who always reminds us of like, we need to hear more youth and more youth voice. And I think when those meetings were in person, more people did bring their children, and more young people did get to engage, and students from local BSUs. In fact, I was participating in our BSU as a student at University of Puget Sound when I first got connected to the Tacoma Pierce County Black Collective. But even in that space, there needs to continue to have the voice of young people and students. But also, as it was mentioned earlier, just in our nonprofit work, anywhere a decision is being made and it's about education, we need to try our best. We need to include the voices of those that we are talking about and discussing and trying to create policy for and make decisions for. We need to make sure that if students are really something, if we value students and quality education for students, that we also show that value in how we fund the work that we're doing, but also how we fund opportunities to include student voice, or to be able to incentivize or compensate students for their participation. We need to think about in a way that we design meetings. When are those meetings being held? Can students attend? Are those meetings accessible? So I think there is so much work to be done, but I also am grateful to be in spaces where I hear adults consistently talking about, but what do students want, and where is a student voice, and how can we prioritize that voice, and how can we create space? So it's happening in some places, but the goal is to see it happening increasingly more all across the state when we're talking about education, and in particular when we're talking about educating Black students.
So our approach is an inside out approach with children, youth, really all of us. But one of the things, and that it's relational. One of the things that we are finding and observing is that the young people in our lives don't have a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and therefore don't have a sense of self. And so a lot of what we do, a lot of where we, really root our work is in self exploration and self actualization. And that's an inside outside kind of approach. It's an opportunity to create space, make intentional space for that kind of self reflection and knowledge. Learning about who you are and how you came into being and what's important to you and what makes you tick and what is your soul's journey and what you come here to do, and finding that in really leaning into that and leaning into developing a strong sense of belonging for our young people. What naturally emerges is clarity. What naturally emerges is a sense of knowing and leadership. And it doesn't have to be necessarily contrived, right? And so when we are in spaces, leaning into that and making space for that to develop, readies our young people to voice and to make meaning of the world around them, and therefore being able to be active and competent change agents in their community with their peers, in whatever environment they find themselves in. And so our approach is, once again, I'm saying it's not new. It is an approach that has worked for us as a people, and that one in which we're finding is very gratifying and has produced amazing results in having young people being able to speak their truths in a way that is grounded in who they are and what they want to be, and how to shape the future. So
I just feel like education is just is so integral, um, just like in life. You learn throughout your entire life, and when we're talking about Black well-being, it's like um, the way in which we're taught to learn, the way that we learn from others. Um, so much of that is defined by our identity. Uh, I think that being able to explore education outside of all the ways in which I feel like white society tells us is just an important way, and to kind of is an important way to like understand ourselves and figure out like what we like, or how we learn, or kind of what we want to do with anything in our lives, taking that outside of just the academic, the purely like academic perspective. And I think that we are not taught to do that by white society. So it's something we got to do ourselves.
I agree. And literally, education is one of the social determinants of health. If we do not have quality education, we are not going to have healthy communities. So if we care about well-being, if we care about the health of our economy, the health of the individuals who live here, then we have to make sure we're doing every single thing that we can to produce quality education that is going to focus on the Black experience and make sure that our students, our Black students, are prepared for their futures. And that's a goal that is attainable. That's a goal that if collectively we combine our power and work together, we can absolutely achieve for the students across our state.
Appreciate the conversation around like education and the connection between education and well-being. And as it was mentioned by the senator, quality education is extremely important. What's important about quality education is that we are self-determinant. We are clear. We are the ones that determine what is quality education, and that is not something that is determined by outside entities.